So first, I'm gonna start us off with talking about what exactly Rockefeller was, who he represented. Well, he was the vice president for Gerald Ford, and he was very persistent. That was what he was known for. He came from somewhat of a wealthy beginning, but from that, he continued and persistently kept going. And he actually got into the political state, and he had actually applied for vice president, which he ended up getting, like I said in the beginning. And that actually allowed him to get some power, and so he made the Rockefeller Association, which helps a lot of Latin Americans in his time, and it's still actually a thing today, and he gave about half his fortune to them when he died. That and him accumulating so many riches is what made him so famous. But about that, now we're gonna go ahead and talk about James Warren. What do you have to say about that?
So James Warren was a man who wanted to start a cult starting in 1931. He assembled a large following of over 900 members in Indianapolis starting in the 1950s. After being exposed during the mid-1970s in the magazine New West, suspicion of illegal activities within the temple started to arise, and a man named Leo Ryan, a congressman, wanted to visit Jonestown for a personal inspection. At first, the visit went well, but later, in November 18th, about 16 temple members decided to leave the Jonestown temple with visitors, and rumors came up about human rights being abused during the temple. James Warren, being paranoid after taking copious amounts of drugs, feared that he was either going to be persecuted for the illegal activities he was participating in, and decided to commit mass suicide by drinking grape juice laced with cyanide. Over 4,000 people died during that day. But I'm going to pass it to Sean to talk about Disney.
Disneyland was a park that was created by Walt Disney's One Idea. It's a park that was built for families to come, have fun, and make memories. There was a lot of plan that went into building the park, but once they had the site located and it was built, it was a great park. Overall, the park did really well and people kept coming back. Up to this day, Disneyland is one of the best parks there is, and even though Walt Disney isn't here to see how his park turned out, we know he'll always be with us when we go there. I will also be talking about Little Rock. So around 1954 as well, black people were starting to come in, and people wanted them to start having an education. So Little Rock, Arkansas started coming up with plans where they would let some black kids go to the schools so that they could get an education. This caused many parents to start fighting against them, and many arguments to start up about what they are doing and why they are doing it. And it got to the point where there were bloody threats and the schools had to shut down. And even though they had all these complications, they still kept trying to go with it through and through. Now I will be passing it back to Lucas. So what is the moonshot?
Well, the moonshot is actually a space race, basically. It happened during Kennedy's and Eisenhower's presidency. And it was basically the U.S. against the USSR. And it started when the USSR famously released Sputnik 1 into space, which caused Eisenhower to immediately take action to try and best them. So from that point, they founded NASA, which was the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which is now known today. It basically continued from there. Like, they would send out Yuri Gagarin to orbit Earth, the USSR did, and well, the US just tried to best them but failed. And it was just like that. It kept going like that until the Apollo missions actually came across. And the Apollo missions actually ended up launching a man into space, the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong, and his friend named Buzz. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to what I'm going to talk about in the Mafia. The Mafia was a simple, real thing. It was just inside corruption. It was around 1959 when it started to die out because the mob boss family owner named Joe Valachi was arrested, and he was basically put up against a deal that he had to release information about the Mafia or he would just be killed on the death penalty. And so he ended up taking that thing about talking about the Mafia. So this led to other people coming up and taking the offer, and so that made the Mafia just break. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Sean now. who's going to talk about the Cold Wars.
So, the Cold Wars happened around the year 1975. There was a soda company that was doing really well at the time, but then at the same time, Coca-Cola was coming in and starting to take over a little bit. So, they did several tests to see how people did with Coca-Cola compared to the other soda company. And they did several tests that made people think that Coca-Cola was a little bit better. And then at the same time, Pepsi was also starting to rise. Coca-Cola and Pepsi were the two that were there. Pepsi was the one that sold most that year. Coca-Cola is still number one in the world today. Now I will be passing it back on to KJ.
I'm going to be talking about the House of Representatives and Senate's passing of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. This was passed in order to strengthen federal efforts to promote international drug law enforcement cooperation. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, by the late 1970s, there was a huge glut of cocaine powder being shipped to the United States. This caused the price of the drug to drop by as much as 80%. Faced with dropping prices for the illegal product, drug dealers converted the powder to crack, a solid form of cocaine that could be smoked. The biggest surge in the use of drug occurred in the crack epidemic between 1984 and 1990, when the drug spread across American City. The crack epidemic dramatically increased the number of Americans addicted to cocaine. In 1985, the number of people who admitted using cocaine on a routine basis increased from 4.2 million to 5.8 million. Continuing on, the AIDS epidemic was also popular in 1981. The CDC published an article containing reports of a rare lung infection, PCP, in 5 young previously healthy gay men. The same day, Dr. Alvin Friedman made a report to the CDC about a cluster of cases of a rare, aggressive, and an unusual cancer that was also found in gay men. June 3rd, the CDC releases another article about the PCP infection. June 3rd, the CDC releases another article about the PCP infection among 26 gay men. The New York Times publishes an article entitled Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals. At this point, the term gay cancer enters the public lexicon. This was until Dr. Rubenstein recognizes that there are children showing signs of these same illnesses affecting gay men, but his diagnoses were dismissed by his colleagues, the reason being that the bias against gay people doesn't make room for actual studies supporting the idea that other people can carry AIDS.
Boris Pasternak was a German music lover. He got into music composition, and that was his passion for about 6 years. And then what ended up happening is he actually wanted to write poems. So he got into literature, and he wrote many poems that can be listed. But one of the most famous ones that is known is Dr. Zhivago, which is a book, actually, that won him a Nobel Prize. And although he had denied it due to the opposition of the Soviet Union, the book is one of the most famous of the 20th century because it really goes into depth of how people changed through the times, like the Russian Revolution in 1917 that they were having.